This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the winter months when the pool water is getting colder and your saltwater system. There are some notable things to know about a saltwater system in the colder winter months, especially when you leave the pools open all year round, or those areas where you leave the pools open all year round, I should say. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy coaching program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. I'll caution you that if you are in these areas where you can get freezing temperatures and you do leave the pool open, there's parts of Texas, there's been deep freezes that have hit areas where the power has gone out and it's been freezing temperatures. And one thing that you would want to do to prevent damage of the salt cell during the wintertime is to remove the salt cell and put a dummy cell in its place. As they do sell various dummy cells for the Pentair and Hayward systems. You can purchase those. And it's basically just a piece of PVC with the threaded fittings. You just unscrew your salt cell and plug it, and then put this kind of dummy cell in there. And this will protect the salt cell. If it does freeze, what happens is that the water will expand inside there and it'll crack the salt cell and pretty much destroy it and ruin it. So if you see pictures of a deep freeze in Texas from a few years ago, you'll see a lot of salt cells that exploded basically from freezing, the water freezing, crystallizing, and then expanding when it defrosted and cracking the plastic. They're usually pretty robust, but under those circumstances, the salt cell is not going to work. And of course, if you close your pool down in the wintertime, you want to remove your salt cell. That's part of the closing procedure. But in those areas like California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, parts of Texas where you don't close your pool and leave them open all year round, there is something to note about the salt system, is that it uses electrolysis to turn the salt, sodium chloride, into chlorine. And as the water temperature drops, it slows down dramatically. Electricity does not conduct really well in cold water, and so you're going to see a significant drop-off of production. Even the cells will shut down. A lot of them will have a cold light indicator or cold water or display water temperature too low. And usually around 50 or 60 degrees is when the salt cells will shut down because of the cold water. And it's just not able to really do its process, to keep it simple, in cold water. Now, there are some good things about the cold water, of course, is that, algae and bacteria grow slower in cold water, very slowly. In fact, it may seem like algae doesn't grow in cold water at all, but it is growing slowly in some cases. So it's one of those things where it's not a deal breaker, I should say, to have a saltwater system, because in the cold months it shuts down. In fact, no one's using the pool in the cold months, so it's actually better that it shuts down, and you're kind of saving the life of the salt cell by not using it, 365 days out of the year. Now, of course, if you heat your pool in the winter to 70 or 80 degrees, well, I guess you would probably heat it to 80 degrees in the winter. 70 is probably still cold for most people. Now, I had a customer that he was one of these workout buffs, and he really liked staying in shape, and he would heat his pool in the wintertime to about 85 degrees. And his gas bill, he said, was about $1,200 or $1,400 a month. And he didn't care. He was like, I'm just going to use my pool all year round. So in that situation, of course, the salt system is not going to shut down because the water temperature is being artificially elevated by the heater. And it's just basically like summertime for the salt system. It won't know the difference. But in cold water, there is a big marked difference. Most systems will know that the water temperature is cold. There's a temp sensor in there for the water temperature. And if it gets below a certain temperature, it'll shut the system down, or it'll produce very low amount of chlorine because of the fact that it just can't produce in the wintertime. So you have to switch over to a different sanitizer in the wintertime. In my opinion, the best chlorine type to use in the wintertime in a saltwater pool are trichlor tablets. And I'll give you a few reasons why I primarily use trichlor tablets in salt pools in the wintertime. So you'll have to have a floater because most pools with a salt system, some of them have a chlorinator built in and some don't, but most of them will not have a inline chlorinator. So you have to get a floater. This is very important that you don't just put the tablets in their skimmer. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to put tablets in the skimmer, but briefly I'll just say that trichlor tablets are very acidic. They have a pH of about 2.7. And if you put them in the skimmer basket, if you're running the pool 24 hours a day, just really no worry about it because the water is flowing through. But when you turn the pool off, all the acidic water sits in the skimmer, and then for 10 hours or 12 hours when the pool's off, it's just sitting and building up. You turn on the system, and all that acidic water goes right through the system, and that could cause staining out of the return line, staining in the main drain of the pool, and it could damage the equipment. So you definitely want to have a floater for the trichlor tablet in the wintertime. Here's why I suggest trichlor tablets in the winter. Because half of the makeup or half of the ingredients of the trichlor tablets is cyanuric acid. And for the summertime, you want to keep your saltwater pool cyanuric acid at about 80 parts per million. And the way to do this, of course, is to add cyanuric acid to the pool directly, either using liquid pool conditioner or the granular or the powdered cyanuric acid. And you'd have to buy the product and add it because the salt system does not have any stabilizer built in. There's no cyanuric acid being produced by the saltwater system. And the only way to add it is manually at the beginning of the season. And as the pool, of course, evaporates, the water evaporates, and you get some rain in your area, the cyanuric acid level drops down with nothing replenishing it because the trichlor tablets, like I mentioned, are about half by weight cyanuric acid. So if you're using trichlor, you're adding cyanuric acid to the pool. But if you're not using trichlor tablets and you have a saltwater system, you're not adding any cyanuric acid. I think you're following me here. So in the wintertime, since the pool water is pretty cold anyway, the tablets are going to dissolve very slowly in the floater. But as they dissolve in the wintertime, and you don't need too many tablets, I should emphasize this. If you have, I'm just going to give you some kind of ballpark sizes of pools and how many tablets I usually use in the wintertime. If you have a 20,000 gallon pool, one tablet in the floater, pretty much closed off all the way, is sufficient in 50 or 60 degree water temperature to sanitize that pool. If you have a 15,000 gallon pool, I would break that tablet in half in some cases and put it in there. You could put a whole tablet in. It's not going to cause a problem, in my opinion. So one tablet per 15 to 20,000 gallon pool is sufficient. Smaller pools, you may want to break the tablets in half and use half a tablet in there because there's really not a big chlorine demand in cold water. The nice thing about the trichlor tablets, then, if you're using, maybe one tablet every 2 or 3 weeks in the pool, maybe one tablet a month in some cases, depending on how cold the water is or how small the pool is, you're adding cyanuric acid to the pool, but you're adding very small amounts of cyanuric acid. So here from November through about April, beginning of April, when the water starts heating up enough to where the salt system reactivates, you may use 5 or 6 tablets, let's say, basically. I'm going to just say I'll just keep it simple and say you're going to use 10 tablets. How's that? That way we can do the math much easier. So let's say, again, 10 tablets, 8 ounces per tablet. In the wintertime, that's about 80 ounces of total chlorine tablets, about half of that is cyanuric acid, maybe 48% to be more accurate. So if you're using 10 8-ounce trichlor tablets, you're adding about 2.4 pounds of cyanuric acid to the pool in the wintertime. That's kind of a boost for your pool in the summer, so that when you go to add the cyanuric acid or conditioner or stabilizer to the pool, however you want to phrase it, you already have some that you're adding to the pool in the wintertime. Even if you double that, you're using 20 tablets in the wintertime, that's going to add about 5 pounds of cyanuric acid to the pool. And that might just be enough cyanuric acid for the whole season for your saltwater generator, depending on your pool size. You have to kind of do the math in the calculator based on your pool size. So you're not adding a ton of cyanuric acid in the wintertime to the pool, and you're kind of recharging the cyanuric acid that you lose during the regular course of the season for the saltwater generator, if that makes sense. So that's the benefit of the trichlor tablets, of course, is that you're adding some cyanuric acid in the wintertime, which will come in handy and beneficial in the summertime, because a saltwater pool does need cyanuric acid in there to protect it from being destroyed by the sun's UV rays. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Now, when they first came out, I'll just go back and share this story. When the saltwater systems first came out, I was doing pool service, of course, when they first hit the market. Pentair was one that started making a lot of them with the IC systems and tennochlor systems. And the Pentair rep was like, yeah, this is great. This is a great way to sanitize the pool. And you don't need to add cyanuric acid to it because it's going to be producing chlorine all the time for you. And it's something great. That was one of their sales pitches. And it turns out you do need cyanuric acid because, as Bob Lowry says, one reason why you need it is because all that chlorine comes out of the return jets. Maybe you have 2 return jets in the pool, and it's a highly concentrated amount of chlorine coming out of there. And the sun's UV rays will destroy most of that in that concentrated area unless you're protecting it with the cyanuric acid. Now, the old school of 30 to 50 parts per million does work effectively in pools that are using, liquid chlorine or cal hypo. But in a real world situation, since there's so much chlorine coming out of the return jets in such a concentrated area, you need a higher level of cyanuric acid to protect it. And that's why 80 parts per million has kind of become the industry standard as far as the cyanuric acid level in a saltwater pool. So the tablets will help you achieve that in the wintertime, and you may not have to add any cyanuric acid products to cyanuric acid razors or products, stabilizers or powder or liquid stabilizers to the pool at that point in the wintertime. Now, one other chlorine type that you can use in the wintertime, let's say you're using tablets and you have a pretty major rainstorm and the chlorine level zeroes out in the pool, which does happen because the trichlor tablets in the wintertime, I did mention that they dissolve very slowly in the floater. They're not going to give you a large dose of chlorine because of the cold water and the fact that they don't dissolve rapidly in the cold water. So there are occasions where the chlorine level is going to drop down because of a rainstorm, or maybe you didn't put enough trichlor tablets in there and they were dissolving too slowly. So let's say you check the chlorine level and it's at 1 part per million. Well, the best chlorine type to use to raise the chlorine in the pool, in my opinion, would be liquid chlorine. Why liquid chlorine over cal hypo? Because liquid chlorine has a byproduct. They all have byproducts. Trichlor has cyanuric acid. Cal hypo has calcium. Well, the byproduct of liquid chlorine is sodium. So you're adding some salt to the pool. Now, as you know, in the wintertime, you get some dilution. And then in the summertime, you have to add bags of salt to the pool to bring up the salt level in the pool. Well, if you're using liquid chlorine as another sanitizer in the winter, along with trichlor tablets, you're adding cyanuric acid with the trichlor, and then you're adding some sodium to the pool. Not a huge amount, but you're adding some sodium to the water, and that is the most compatible chlorine type to salt for a saltwater generator, because if you're adding calcium to the pool, you may cause the salt plates to get some calcium buildup with cal hypo. So adding liquid chlorine is kind of like a substitute to the saltwater system that's very, very similar. And the byproduct, again, is sodium. So liquid chlorine is a great way to raise the chlorine level in the pool in the wintertime with a saltwater system when you need to, if the trichlor tablets are not sufficient to raise the chlorine level up and maintain the chlorine level, I should say, week in and week out while you're not using the saltwater generator. Now, coming out of winter, here April and May is when we start firing up the saltwater systems again. And one mistake that is often made is to trust the salinity reading on the system itself. Now, the water is still fairly cold. The cell might even be dirty from, if you didn't take it out and put a dummy cell in. And so I wouldn't trust the salinity reading of the system. Hayward is notorious for this, giving you really low salt readings when it's really not low. Some Pentair systems will do this as well. So I would say when you're starting up the system again in April or May here in California, get a digital salinity meter. Buy one on Amazon. I like the Hawk brand. I like the Lamont brand ones. These are great saltwater salinity testers. Get one of these and test the salinity level. A lot of these will compensate for temperature. And then you're going to get a true salinity reading. You don't want to overdose the pool with salt at the beginning of the season, because then you're going to drain some water out, or you may have too much salt when the system really fires up and is running at, with the water temperature at the correct level. So make sure you check the salinity level with a independent digital salinity salt reader, and then you can add salt accordingly once you get the accurate reading. And again, everywhere is different when the system when these salt systems come back online, I should say. And here in California, April and May are the months when the water temperature gets into the 70s and the saltwater systems are able to reactivate and make chlorine for the pool. And then you just take out the floater, stop using the trichlor tablets, and then the salt system will generate the chlorine during those spring and summer months for you and into the fall. And into the winter months here again, from usually late October into the beginning of March, you're using an alternate chlorine type because the saltwater generators are just not producing chlorine during that time. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Click on the podcast icon. That'll take you to a drop-down menu of over 1,800 podcasts. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.